Hello and welcome to this Unity tutorial. What we will be doing on this channel for a while is a little mixture between Unity and Unreal Engine, and I've decided we're going to be making the same game in both engines. Now this game is basically like an old game that I made for the Game Boy. When I was learning C and whatnot, I made like a simple bounce game on the Game Boy, and I want to recreate that. And in Unity, we'll be doing a two-dimensional version, and in Unreal Engine 5, we'll be doing a three-dimensional version. And that way, you know, I can kind of show how the different engines operate and how you can come up with different solutions to these similar problems, and gives us some good learning opportunity here, because I'll be learning alongside you guys. I am no expert in Unity or Unreal, but I am decent. So without further ado, I'm going to go to new project. We're going to go to a Universal 2D here. I'm going to choose this folder. I'm going to go ahead and call this project YouTube, and I'm going to hit create project. This is going to boot up. Now I'm on Ubuntu 24.04 or 02, something like that. But this would work on Windows, Windows 10, Windows 7 probably doesn't do Unity 6. But anyway, Windows 10, Windows 11, the new stuff riddled with the AI will likely work just fine. Now, while this takes some time to load here, I just want to mention that since we'll be redoing the same thing in Unreal Engine, I will be separating these videos into two different areas on YouTube for easeability and whatnot. And then also, I'll be making like a very simplified version of the game right now in one tutorial, and then next time we'll go through and complicate the hell out of it. Give it a little bit more game feel and kind of organize the code a little bit better. For now, and one other thing, I'm not going to go over like with the inspector or hierarchy or how to do things so much. I'm going to expect that you have some Unity experience. There are so many Unity tutorials out there. It would be a waste of my time and yours for me to explain every little thing that Unity has. And yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and make a new folder, and I'm going to go call this game. Inside game, I'm going to create a model behavior script. And for this one, I'm going to go ahead and call this movement. This movement script is going to be for the player. I'm going to go ahead and delete those two things there. And we really want to figure out what our movement is going to be. Now, first off, you can see the AI even here is pretty riddled with the wanting to give you some type of thing by itself. And if you go ahead and hit tab, I mean, it has the stuff there, and it more than likely would probably work fine. But we're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna think about this, right? So in our game here, we're gonna have a couple things. I want a square, and this square is going to be the area the player can wander around in. I'm going to make it a 5x5. And then, of course, we're going to want a player. I'm going to bring this up in order. I'm going to change the color to kind of like a bluish color here. That should be fine. Because of the outside window in the main camera's environment is also kind of a bluish, I'm going to just change that to kind of like a light purple for now. And the square itself, I'm going to change to a kind of like a green here. A little less saturation. Yeah, something like that. And the capsule, you know what? I want it to be kind of like a chunky guy. So something sort of like this. And if you go ahead and hit play, of course, you'll just see your object and the ground here. Now, I'm going to tag the capsule as player. I think this is a good thing to do. And so, okay, well, what is this game? Basically, we as the player are going to bump into a ball. That ball is going to be able to bounce around. And I want to keep it within the bounds of this rectangle or square. And so I'm going to create a box, a square, and I'm going to kind of move this around. I'll hit W and whatnot. I'm going to change the scale here to a 5 and a 0.5. Just kind of move it like that. I'm going to duplicate with Control D. Kind of move like this. And duplicate again. Move one up. I use the middle mouse, to pan around, just like most 3D, 2D software. We're going to call this a 5 here and a 0.5 in the Y, kind of like, the inverse of what we did on the other. And yeah, there's like a little gap there. You can move it around to your liking. I'm going to leave it like that for now. It's no big deal. And so these are going to be the walls. I'm going to go ahead, click here, make a new tag. I'm going to call this tag wall. And then I click off, click all these, and tag them as wall here. These are going to have to be able to take some type of physics thing, right? Because we're going to hit a ball. Ball needs to bounce off of these walls. And so here I'm going to make a box collider. Now notice I clicked on one and did this. It's much better. Click on all of them. We're going to hit a box collider 2D. And I'm also going to do a rigid body 2D. I'm going to tell the scale to be nothing, and I'm going to constrain the X, Y, and Z. We don't want those to move whatsoever. And similarly with the player, I'm going to add a capsule collider 2D. I'm going to add a rigid body 2D. I'm going to freeze his Z rotation and turn gravity off. This is so that when we bump into the ball, we don't do a weird spin. From here, I'm going to duplicate our capsule. I'm going to make it smaller, so a 0.2 and a 0.2. More like a 0.1 in the Y. Make it more ball shape. I'm going to make this kind of like a red. And that should be fine. And of course, you want to name these things. For now, I do not care about the organization. So I'm not going to name them. I'm just going to hit play. And this is just going to show, we have the ball, we have this, nothing's falling due to gravity. Yay, stuff. And so I notice there's a little more of a gap there than I would like. So I'm going to just move those in slightly closer, like so. All right. Now, inside of here, this is going to be the player's movement. So I'm going to say, hey, I need a game object player. I need a way to get this. Of course, we could say it's public. We could do a serialized field. My code editor does not appreciate Unity's syntax. So sometimes, as you notice, it popped this up. It had the wrong thing. That's just how it goes on Linux. Sometimes you have some weird stuff here. And notice when I do void, or I just, haven't done anything and it wants to populate this. I'm going to go ahead and hit tab for now. And this is using the legacy input system. which is fine. If we hit File, Save, and I'm going to click into Unity, if I right-click and hit Refresh, this is going to allow the changes that came from Visual Studio over. And on our player, this capsule here, if I put this movement component and I say, hey, this is the guy who's going to be moving, and hit play, we will see red in the console here. And it's going to say, hey, you are bad because bad input, which is fine. We're going to go to Edit. We're going to go to Project Settings. Under Player, if you scroll down and see where it says Active Input Handling, Input System Package Manager, New, I'm going to click Old, I'm going to hit Apply, I'm going to click Save, and this is going to restart our editor. So for now, it looks like the editor is froze, you can't click on anything. It does a auto restart. And yes, you should be using the new input system for this quick tutorial. I want to spend less time worrying about the proper ways to go about doing something and just go about doing something for now. So if I move now, we move this way. I don't move up and down, and that's because the AI that wanted to populate this was not really thinking in terms of X versus Y. It's trying to move X and Z currently. And so if I even did like player.transform, notice how it populates this for us. And this is the Y, this is the Z. So even if we, file saved and refreshed here, once this, compiles, we'll have the same issue. We can move left to right, but not up and down. And that is simply because it has inverted those. So that technically needs to be there. However, this is not the way that I'm going to choose to go about this. So I know that when the object that we're going to bump into the object needs to bounce, and it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense if when we hit that object, so if I move left to right, that object shouldn't just like cattywampus go to the left, for example. If I'm moving right, we want the object when we bump it to also move in that direction. So keeping that in mind, there's a few variables that I think would be to our benefit here. And so I'm going to make it public, and we're going to need a direction. And what type would direction be? Well, we don't want an integer here because this would just be a single value. And there is a few more positions to kind of keep in mind, right? There's an X and a Y. So we want a vector 2 here. And I'm also going to do a vector 2. And I'm going to call this last direction. And from here, I'm going to do a fixed update. So let's do a void fixed update. And let's see what it auto populates here for us. So if direction is not vector 3.0, then it's last direction equals direction. This is almost okay. I'm going to normalize that. And what we really need to do is say, hey, well, what is direction equal to? Well, it's equal to 0 in a sense. So I'm going to say direction is equal to a vector, I believe it would be a vector 2.0 in Unity here. So we have our direction, and this last direction is being normalized. And here, I don't want that. That was AI slop there. Now here, how are we actually getting this direction, right? So basically what we're doing is we're saying, hey, direction is going to be 0, And if it's not 0, we're going to let last direction equal to our normalized. But how do we get it to not be 0? In this case, we're going to use those input axes. So I'm going to say, hey, direction.x, and notice it says get axis raw, horizontal. This is actually quite very close, but I'm just going to say get axis. Probably get axis raw isn't too terrible, but basically we're always saying, hey, direction 0. Unless we're pushing one of these buttons, and if we're pushing one of these buttons, well, then last direction is going to be normalized. It's going to be the direction normalized there. And the other couple things here is, well, we kind of want a speed, right? So I'm going to say a public vector2, and I'm going to call this velocity, and I'm also going to do a public vector2 and position. So we have a velocity, we have a position, and in our update here, okay, looks like it auto-populated and saying, hey, positions players transform, velocity is direction, and then this here, it probably wouldn't be absolutely terrible, but it's not what I'm going to do. So first off, we need to basically move the player based off of that direction. So I'm just going to say player.transform. So transform.position. And we want to move this position. Now, to move a position in Unity, there is a nice little translate guy. And here, using the direction and delta time, and then some value to increase this by. But we need to also update our last position. So here, this position, I'm going to go ahead and call this last position. And our last position is going to be equal to our current position. So this is it. I'm going to hit File and hit Save. I'm going to come back over to Unity and hit Refresh. We're going to notice vector2 is ambiguous between Unity Engine.vector2 and System.numericsvector2. What's happening here is, as I was typing, my code editor decided to put in System.numerics. We're going to remove that and recompile with a refresh. And look here, and goes vector2 does not contain a definition for 0. Let's take a look here. So we have a vector2, and I believe this is the issue. It's not capital, so we will make that lowercase. Something my code editor just did not catch, and it looks fine. I'm going to go ahead and hit play. And so the expectation is when I move or hit W or S or D or A. And right now, we can bump into this object here. So this is fine. But when we bump into that object, we want it to bounce. And I think one thing is I'm going to go ahead and make that object slightly bigger. So let's do like a 0.4 and a 0.2. Something like that. Looks fine. No, it's kind of a capsule, so it it's going to look kind of funky. Circle, could be used as well. So this is the movement that we have. I'm going to go ahead and make a new script. So create 2D, scripting, model behavior. and I'm going to go ahead and call this bounce and open it. There we are. And bounce is going to go on our other object there. So on our other capsule, if we go ahead and put bounce there, this is the bounceable object. I'm going to go ahead and delete these, and I'm just going to call game object here real quick, and we're going to call this one bounce. I'm going to make a serialized field. I'm going to let that on-serialized hit just because it's a little easier for me to spell serialized that way. And so we have that game object there. And we really need a reference to the player. And to get that reference, I'm going to say, hey, public, and I'm going to call the movement, and I'm going to call that one player. And so if we file save, I'm going to put serialized field above this one as well, so it can be set in the inspector. And save again. Go back to Unity and do refresh. So this is going to compile, and over here we have two game objects. I'm going to place in capsule 1, our bouncer, and capsule is the player with the movement script component. Back here, we need to know when that collision has happened, and then we also need to update the movement accordingly. And so here, I'm going to say on collision enter 2D. Notice it's trying to auto-populate that. And here we're going to say dot tag. Hey, if it's the object that we collided with, if it is the player, then we're going to do something. And then similarly, if that game object tag is the wall, we're also going to go ahead and do something. This here would set the movement, while the update would actually do the movement. And so what we're going to need is a couple variables here. We're going to need a speed and an acceleration. So I'm going to use float for acceleration. And this is going to be by how much is our object slowing down per frame. With how we have it, 10 could be quite a bit. So I'm going to put 0.2 for how much we're going to be slowing down per frame. And I'm actually going to use a vector 2, and I'm going to call this speed. And for now, I'm going to let this equal a vector 2.0. Initialize it with a nothing. And then in the update, I'm going to say, hey, speed, you are going to be vector 2. And this warp thing might be okay, but I'm going to do a move towards. I believe that should be a capital M. So move towards. And let's see what it auto-populated here. Speed, direction, and then it hits it with a multiply by 10 and an acceleration. This seems wrong to me. Of course, we need the speed, but I'm going to say the second parameter is going to be a vector 2.0, and then this acceleration I'm going to multiply by delta time. So this is going to make speed go to this value. This is kind of like a manual version of the lerp. And then we're going to move our transform. And it's saying, hey, bounce transform, translate speed times time dot delta time. And that should, I mean, that really should be enough there. But we still have a couple missing parts and pieces. So this speed starts off as 0, right? So 0 is going to 0, interpolating by that much is how you can really think of this. And then this is moving this object by this over this amount of time. That there should be time dot delta time. And it looks like it auto-populated the numerics again. So here, this really is the last chunk of what we're need to modify. I'm going to say speed is going to be equal to the player's velocity. So player dot velocity, and this times 2. You know, you can play around with this value. Really, you shouldn't have it hard-coded, but this is basically going to give a little bit more oomph to that object. And I'm going to go ahead, hit File, Save All, and refresh. Let this compile, check for any errors, and hit play and watch kind of what happens when I collide with this object. So far, not a whole lot, right? Like we bump it, nothing really seems to be happening. If we look at the capsule, it is set to player. So we come back, just kind of look in here. We have the movement player. We have the game object bounce. And just kind of verifying, so those are there. So why would it not? Why would it not actually move here? Just kind of taking a look. We have a move towards. We take in our speed. Vector 2.0, acceleration, time.delta time. This seems fine. And then on collision enter 2D, if the collision game object tag is player, speed is the player's velocity times 2. This should be fine. Let's take a look at movement here. Where are we updating our velocity? This seems to be the the pinch point. So let's take a look here. Inside update, we're saying, hey, the last position is player's transform position. We are moving the player by the direction times the time, but we never updated the velocity. And so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to say velocity, and looks, you know what, that looks about fine, honestly. I wonder about this part, but as you notice, coding is changing quite a bit. I'm not a big fan of it with the auto populations. It's getting harder and harder to get away from that type of stuff. And here, it's ambiguous between a vector 3 and a vector 2, and that would be on line 34. So looking at line 34, it's probably saying this is being ambiguous. Can't quite tell if that's a vector 3 or vector 2. I'm going to cast that to a vector 2 and make it very explicit. Something like this. And so that's one thing too that I'm noticing a lot with a lot of this auto populations is it seems to have a rough idea of what has to happen but also gives weird bugs like that. So when I now bump into this, notice we have some type of movement there. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play again. Notice it kind of had that weird jitter when it hit the box here. One thing about that we could do is if we come over to the rigid body on that ball, collision detection, and turn it to continuous, now when it hits, I'm pretty sure it will just stick to the wall. Yeah. Or not so much, which is fine. But the main thing we want it to do is when we hit the wall is to kind of bounce around here. And that would be this part. And what we really want to do is think about the kind of like the normals, right? Because you have 4 edges, 4 normals. Normals are typically thought about a lot when at C2, like I say normal, I start typing. How did it possibly know? I mean that's quite crazy there. And then just kind of checking here. Okay, yeah, speed, reflect, it seems fine. And here, I'm just gonna say, leave it like that and see what happens. Right click, refresh. Back when I started Unity, there's a whole lot of tutorials, and it always amazed me how people just knew what to do. And I think back then it was a lot more, you had to read the documentation, you had to practice. And nowadays it's getting less and less so, but I encourage you guys to still read the API, read the documentation, turn off the autocomplete, and really learn how this stuff works, because that's what's going to set you apart. And here it's just saying vector 2 is ambiguous between the system.numerics that my code editor likes to populate because it wants to be a pain in the butt. And we're going to go ahead and hit refresh. And hit play. And the hope is when you bounce this, it would bounce off the wall. And so with this system here, this is going to be the start of our game. The point of this game is going to be we're going to have different walls inside of our system here, and we're going to want to bounce this object to a zone. And if we get it to that zone, then it's going to go to the next level. And so we could come in here, we could duplicate these walls, make them different sizes. Let's say like a 0.2 and a 0.5 or something. You know what, we'll just go 2 0.5s here. We could like move this around, duplicate it, create a interesting system here. Of course, we're going to want the player to not be able to move past these walls either. Notice how those disappeared. So I'm going to click on 5, 6, 7, and 8 here. Seems to be an order issue. I'm going to hit play. And now if I was to bounce this, it would also bounce off those objects. And then notice, like if we had our zone here, we would have to, bounce it in a certain orientation to make it reach that zone. And yeah, so this is going to be the very simple game that we'll be building. from here, it's going to be some organization, doing a little bit more systems programming than just this movement. The movement is, I mean, this is really the only mechanic that we need. Code-wise as well, where we have this on collision enter. Really, we're just going to need like a on trigger enter 2D and have this on whatever our goal is, and then some type of manager that's going to manage the system. We're going to want to instantiate or create objects on runtime. I'm also going to show how to make a input manager for all the movement input that the player is doing. So instead of having this type of thing happening in fixed update on the player, we're going to add him to a list of input listeners and use more of an interface system for that. But for now, I think this is a good place to stop and to consider. You know, when we interact, we it's very static right now, right? So when we touch that object, we're going to want some stretch and squish. When it bounces, the player himself is going to want the stretch and squish as well. We're going to want some particle effects going off and just add more and more and more polish to this and do more focus on the actual game design versus the programming. And this is why in this lesson I really sped through the bounce script and the movement script here, because as you could tell, the AI nowadays, it's going to be able to give you relatively the code that you need, but it is up to us as game designers to make that interesting. So from the next video, or for the next video, we will be focusing on gameplay feel.